Hello and welcome to Blueprint Cymru, a podcast speaking to interesting people about how they would build a better future for Wales. Today's guest is Gwern Gwynfil. Born and raised in a small market town of Tregaron, Gwern says he's very proud of his entry in the Welsh Wici. He loves Cymru. He has family, 5 children. He enjoys swimming, writing and speaking his mind without fear or favour. He yearns for a Wales that can fulfil its potential and the freedom to succeed in this shared national goal. Left entirely to his own devices, he would write, read, pontificate, swim and drink Japanese whiskey, but not all at the same time. He is, unusually, both a cat and a dog person, also tropical fish. He believes very firmly that with ambition, bravery and confidence, Cymru can become a positive influence in the world with an impact far above its perceived capability and capacity. Gwern says, we have the history, the resources, the skills and the passion for this, but we must harness it with vigour and intent. Hello Gwern, welcome to the podcast.
Hello Simon, it's good to be here. That sounded great. I want to meet the guy, he sounds fun.
Yeah, he does, doesn't he? Yeah, you wouldn't mind having a pint with the guy. So tell us a little bit, obviously in the introduction there, we had a little bit about who you are, but give us in your own words, how you got to where you are today. And
Wow, that's a good question, isn't it? How did I get to where I am today? We could be here for hours, so I'll give you a sort of potted version. Born and bred in Tregaron in Ceredigion, in what was quite a vibrant market town as I was growing up, certainly far more vibrant than it has become. My mother started her business when I was very young, the Rhiannon, what has now become the Rhiannon Centre, the Rhiannon jewellery business, and worked very hard to make that successful. It's been there for over 50 years. It's probably worth noting that it was very unusual at the time for a woman to do what my mother did. I'm sure that had she done it 20 or 25 years later, she would have been very much celebrated in ways that she hasn't been. And I wish I could do more to celebrate her because, you know, she really did set out to sell Wales to the world in ways that others have not done, and certainly no one was doing in the 70s, 80s and 90s. And I think, you know, there should be more recognition of that. So that's very interesting, and that in the background certainly shaped who I was growing up. You know, we had a workshop in the ground floor of our house filled with Irish wolfhounds and children. We had a massive old Gestetner hand-cranked printing machine, which we would use to make posters, including at various times protest posters or promotional posters that were very much Welsh in their theme. My mother had some hilarious ideas. I don't know if you remember the old Heineken advert, refreshes the parts so the beers cannot reach. She did a skit on that, which was aimed at tourists reaching the parts of Wales that other tourists don't reach. That was quite fun. And there were all sorts of things like that around my childhood, which sort of bred into me, I suppose, an appreciation that you can be innovative, you can do things even if you're in the back of beyond, in the middle of nowhere, and you can really express yourself in ways that may not be comfortable with the prevailing mood, and do so successfully. And indeed, perhaps you should, because too many people allow the prevailing mood to keep them quiet and silent. And that's certainly not the background that I have come from.
I suppose that leads us quite nicely into how you and I and others came together to start New Wales and why we did that. And part of the reason for putting this podcast together is to bring together those that are in Wales and the Welsh diaspora globally to engage in new thought and to try and get everyone else in Wales that has an interest in the betterment of Wales to engage in that thought and put their ideas forward and not be afraid of trying something different.
Yes.
So what was your motivation for wanting New Wales to exist?
So Wales is anemic in terms of its civic society for all sorts of reasons. And it's quite hard to catalyze that civic society in Wales because of the place where we have arrived, the atrophy that has set in across Wales, for all sorts of reasons, which I'm sure we'll come back to later in this conversation. So we all came together to set up New Wales to have some kind of forum which can at least contribute to and hopefully, inspire more debate, wider thought, a larger conversation about why we are where we are and how we get from where we are to where we aspire to be. And part of that is having the aspiration and having the vision of a vibrant global Wales, which really does have an impact beyond our perceived capacity at the moment and our perceived capability. A perceived capability which is suppressed by our history, but mostly suppressed by our choice. And I know it's not necessarily a conscious choice, but we put ourselves in the box. So it is for us to climb out of the box. And if we can do anything, however small it is, to help that along, then that's fantastic. And obviously, I mean, you mentioned in my introduction, I am ambitious, and it would be great if New Wales could get some resources so that we could do a lot more. We could do some actual independent, objective research. We could really get things moving. But unfortunately, Wales doesn't have that tradition either. We don't have that civic society, that philanthropy, that supportive of organizations like New Wales to do what they can do, and certainly not outside the sort of wider aegis of the Welsh government, which dominates that third sector and public sector in ways that are definitely both disheartening and unhealthy for Wales.
And obviously, we collectively agreed that the continual shelving of very meaningful reports into how Wales can improve itself and its constitutional situation within the United Kingdom, how those reports are constantly shelved. And the latest one with Dr. Rowan Williams and Laura McAllister was a founding bedrock to New Wales and why we wanted to take that conversation forward. So just drawing on that a bit, why do you think that more organisations and more political groups perhaps within Wales don't take these great reports and act on them with more vim and vigour?
Well, there's lots of reasons, aren't there? I mean, one of the big reasons is that we've had the same party in a dominant position for far too long, and that's created or added to heightened the situation of atrophy in Wales. I mean, that is likely to change, or is almost certain to change come May 2026. But we are so enmeshed in a culture of acceptance of the way things are that what might happen is that culture just continues to roll over, and we just create the same culture with a slightly different flavor at the top, which is worrying, to tell you the truth. It's incredibly disappointing that the urgency of parts of that Constitutional Commission report have quietly been shelved. And what little noise there is noise around the edges. I noticed there's been a lot of noise recently about the Crown Estates and devolution of the Crown Estates again. Mark Drakeford was going on about this. Others have been raising it. Whilst we were involved in Yes Cymru, we did an awful lot to push this and to raise the profile of that. But really, that is something of a fringe issue. I mean, it's symbolic, certainly, but it's not core, and it doesn't change anything about the devolution settlement in any fundamental way. So it's an easy way to perpetuate the status quo. no doubt at some point there'll be a SOP from the Westminster government to talk about the devolution, or to start to plan a schedule of the devolution of Crown estates. And that those crumbs will, no doubt be assumed to be enough to quieten down those obstreperous Welsh rebels over there on the west. But it's not enough. None of this is enough. I'm going to read you something actually, which I saw this morning by Andrew Davis, former chief whip, former economy minister in the Labour government, now retired, of course. So he probably feels he can say this. And this, I think this is on Nation, actually. He said this morning. The article appeared. We have what I call a client state where there's too much secrecy. There's not enough openness and transparency. So many organisations and individuals in Wales depend on funding and patronage from the Welsh government. And I think civil society needs to be stronger and more independent. And I think there needs to be more transparency and accountability. Now, in a much more subtle way, he's saying what we're saying, and he can say it, or he feels he can say it now because he's retired. He's a retired Labour grandee. His career is no longer riding on this. And there are others who have done the same. Mick Antoniv has been saying similar things since he chose to step down. I have a lot of time for Lee Waters, who effectively ended his career by choosing to say these things and stepping out and stepping forth. And yet we have this, those are honourable exceptions, or they've left government, they've left leadership. So it's easy enough to say, and they're still not forthright about it. What he could be saying, what Andrew Davis could be saying here is, look, guys, it's got to stop. The gravy train's got to stop. This idea that if you speak up, you have no career in Wales and you can't get a job, it's got to stop. We have to encourage people to be bold. We have to encourage people to innovate. We have to encourage people to have that adventure, because without the adventure, without the risk, we don't go anywhere. We're just going to stand still. Nothing is going to happen. Nothing is going to change. But that culture of standing still, of worrying that you cannot push against the prevailing winds within Wales, that you cannot stick your head above the parapet, that you just have to play the game, is the problem that we face. And just for the record, I have conversations with people all the time who are in leadership positions in Wales, in various organisations across the third sector and government and other places. And all of them in private will agree with this. They will say, we need radical change. We need to get rid of some of the things that don't work. We need to find new ways of doing things. But none of them will say it publicly, because they know that if they say it publicly, or they fear that if they say it publicly, it will impact their careers and their prospects, and they will not take that risk. And obviously, that's reductive in so many ways. Now, I feel, because I have these conversations with people, and I feel I have to say these things publicly, because if I wasn't, I'd be a hypocrite. But obviously, that impacts my opportunities to find a leadership role in Wales. So I have a job at the moment. But it's for Oxfam, and it's great. And some of it is rewarding. I've had the privilege of being able to do some quite innovative and interesting work around Gaza and around a few other issues. But that isn't really me being able to do things in a way that provides positive input for Wales in the way that I would like to. And I have no illusions about my own abilities, but I do know that I have something to offer. And I do know that I can't find a way to offer it, because that space has been restricted to such an extent for people who want to do what I want to do. No one employing me is going to get someone who sits behind a desk and just toes the line. They're going to get someone who wants change and who wants boldness. And people know that. So it doesn't happen. I imagine that you're in a similar position, Simon. It's a frustrating, reductive trap of atrophy and decline that we have created for ourselves. I think this is what we need to remember as well. We've created this for ourselves. It is for us to change, not for anyone else. It's no point us saying, oh, Westminster government need to give us more devolution. Westminster government need to do this, or we can't do this because we can do this, but we have to choose to do it.
And your frustrations and your ambitions for Wales and for the people of Wales come across in your articles. And one of the areas that you've written about recently was an article on flags. I remember a few months ago you did one which I very much enjoyed, using the lobster fisherman as an analogy.
That's lobsters, yes.
And you've one that should be published soon, which really points to a lot of what you've just been mentioning of the lack of courageousness in individuals and Wales as a nation as a whole to really back itself, to believe in what it and its people could do for itself. And I think in that article you cite the latest boss of Cymru, and the fact that he's a Australian that's been parachuted in, and this is not the first time that Wales has done this.
Yeah, I mean, the guy from Australia, although there was quite a negative news story about him in Nation, about him being sacked from his previous role in Australia, and potentially maybe he couldn't find a job in Australia. So, and that's why he's come to Wales. Now, he may be very talented, he may have a great skill set, but why are we looking in Australia for someone to run Cymru in a nation where water is politically sensitive, it's historically sensitive, and it's absolutely pertinent to every single person in Wales? Because right now, it's not being done particularly well. There's shit in the rivers, there's shit in the sea. None of this is good enough. And yet, we don't feel that any Welsh person is good enough to take that role. Even though, undoubtedly, a Welsh person will be more committed to improving those things, will have a deeper meaning and understanding around Wales and Welsh water than any guy from Australia, however well-intended or talented they may be. So why has that job gone to someone from Australia? And the other one, of course, which is possibly even more egregious, is Natural Resources Wales, Cyfoeth Naturiol Cymru. Now, that's a pretty core Welsh institution with some fairly fundamental needs for an understanding of the Welsh political environment and of Wales in all sorts of ways. And they've appointed a chair who lives in Bristol and who has only the vaguest of connections to Wales. His son came to Cardiff University. His wife's grandparents were born in Wales, but obviously don't live here anymore, or he would have said so. This person is not going to understand.
Well, I believe
Natural Resource Wales plays in Welsh life.
I believe he also has other roles that he's managing at the same time. Yeah,
he does. I mean, I think the chairman role, the chair role for Natural Resources Wales is only 2 or 3 days a week. But if at only 2 or 3 days a week, either he's going to have to be briefed constantly about the wider implications, the cultural implications of the decisions that he's making, or the chairing and the guiding that he's giving to his board. Potentially, he's going to be the kind of chair, best kind of chairs often, who just sits there and makes sure the meeting goes well and says nothing. I doubt, given his CV, that he's that kind of chair, because he's probably going to want to impose some of his own beliefs, decisions, inclinations on that board. That's not good for Wales. I mean, with the best will in the world, this guy from Bristol, who no doubt is a lovely chap with a great CV and lots of talents and skills, he is not going to understand the role that Natural Resources Wales is playing in Welsh life. He is not going to have a vision for the role that it could or should be playing in Welsh life. This is a poor appointment. and it should have gone to someone who has that understanding. Now, you do need to get talent from elsewhere sometimes, but you have to believe in yourself as well. You have to accept that you are bringing up the leaders of tomorrow today, and you are giving them the opportunities, and you are allowing them to fail. And in their failures, people learn more from failure than success, always. And you develop that culture of leadership and that culture of care. And it just isn't there in Wales. We don't do it. We don't believe in ourselves. I think I used that. Do you know who the quote is, by the way? The quote was, "If you don't believe in yourself, no one will do it for you." Do you know?
I don't know who that's from. No.
It's Kobe Bryant. Do you know who Kobe Bryant was?
No, please enlighten me.
Kobe Bryant was a famous defender in the basketball in the US. He's the one you probably do remember. His airplane crashed, and I think 7 or maybe even 9 people lost their lives a few years ago. He was only in his early 40s. But that's a Kobe Bryant quotation. And obviously he came from a background which was not a privileged background, and became a leading basketball player. And I like the quote. It's good. He believed in himself, and it took him all the way to the top of the NBL, and that's great. And why can't Wales do that? We may be small, we may be on the west coast of the British Isles, but we have a lot going for us. We have a depth of culture, a depth of history. We have amazing skills and talents. It is a travesty that so many of the most successful Welsh people have left Wales to find that success, because that pathway to success does not exist here in Wales. Or if you attempt that path here in Wales, the chances are that someone or something will block that path or attempt to hold you back on that path. Not necessarily fully consciously, but because of the cultural environment and infrastructure that we have allowed to surround us here in Wales.
Well, I think that is a cultural, something that's imbued into the culture across the British Isles. It is probably more intense, a sense of and the feeling in Wales than elsewhere. But I'm just speaking from my personal experience of life. One of the reasons I pretty much left the United Kingdom at the age of 20 was I had belief in myself. I had ambitions, and I experienced exactly what you just described. No, you can't do that. No, that's not how it's done here. So I took myself to France, and then I've eventually found myself in Africa, South America, and now I'm here in Quebec. And that was because I didn't feel that there was space and capacity for people like me anywhere in the United Kingdom, but particularly in Wales. And again, one of the things you brought up there is that ambition and that ability to back yourself. Now I'm here in Quebec, and back in the 1960s, the people of Quebec, they said to themselves, actually, life is a bit shit. Why does the church own everything? Why are the English speakers not allowing us to go to university and get the best jobs? We're not going to stand for it anymore. And, maybe unlike the Irish or other places of the world, they didn't start an insurgency and a bombing campaign. They politically organized themselves. And as it's known here, the Quiet Revolution began. And they took back the control, and they said to Ottawa, we want this. We don't want English dominating our times. And obviously, different to Wales, where French is and always has been the dominant language in Quebec. So the language side is a little more complicated in Wales, perhaps. And I know that it's something that alienates certain parts, particularly in the southeast of Wales. People feel that if we're talking about the Welsh language, that excludes them. Hopefully that's changing. But where I'm coming from is Quebec found that belief in itself. It found the ambition, and today it's very, running a second, very close second as far as economic strength and power to its neighbour Ontario. Wales could do that.
Absolutely.
But it needs to start believing that it can do that.
Confidence. It all springs from confidence. And Wales is not a confident nation. Wales is not the people of Wales are not a confident people. The confidence has been extracted from Wales, and there are no leaders restoring that confidence proactively, relentlessly, and with a clear vision of what Wales can become. And that's the problem, isn't it? Unless we start to have that change. Can you imagine if every single organization in Wales at leadership level changed the language from their current language to, right, everyone, we can do whatever we want. We can be much better because we've got this. Let's do it. This is where we want to be in 3 years. This is where we want to be in 5 years. This is where we want to be in 10 years. And each one of those steps is challenging, ambitious, and not easy to achieve, but possible. So let's all do it. And if everybody does that, you suddenly have a completely different attitudes. And cultural change and transformation is difficult. It is difficult, but it starts with language. It always starts with language. And that language is not there at the moment. It's not prevalent. It's a little bit Weasley, like that quote from Andrew Davis, who wants to say what I'm saying, but won't say it the way I say it. And that's the problem, isn't it? We don't use language to express ourselves confidently. We don't have that innate boldness. If we are ambitious, we hide it. There's a Welsh phrase, isn't there? Cadw eich pen yn eich plu, which is keeping your head in your feathers. We're a bit shy. We're not bold and brave. Why not? We're Welsh. Wales is fab. It's amazing.
And as you pointed out in your article on the flags, has an awesome dragon on a awesome flag.
Awesome dragon. And it's ours. No right-wing populists are going to be able to steal that from us. No chance.
One of the things because I recently interviewed for this podcast Lembit Opik, who obviously used to be an MP in Montgomeryshire for the Liberal Democrats. And he's an interesting and perhaps divisive character. But one of the things that he brought out in that interview was something very similar to what you were saying there, is he has great respect for Sinn Féin and where they wanted to take Northern Ireland. He said when he was the Liberal Democrat spokesperson for Northern Ireland about 20 years ago now, members of the Sinn Féin organisation came to him and said, look, this is our plan. This is our roadmap. This is where we're going to take Northern Ireland. And they've delivered on that. They had their plan and they have their plan. It's for 30 years. We are working towards reunifying Ireland. And this is how we're going to do it. They were open with him about it. They were open with all the other politicians about that was their intent. And they've delivered it. So that's something that Lembit was saying, and I'm inclined to agree with him. Somebody or an organisation or the people of Wales need to put forward, this is where we want Wales to be in 50 years, and this is how we're going to do it. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, and you've drawn on many of the lacking of confidence reasons, there seems to be a habit of, oh, well, we don't have the powers, we don't have the resources. The Senate can't do that. Whereas, Sinn Féin didn't take that as a reason not to try. The people of Quebec didn't take that as a reason not to do it. They just said, well, we don't have these powers, but we want these powers, and we're going to have these powers, and this is how we're going to get them. And we're not going to stop until we get them. So why is that not in the people of Wales?
It's a good question, and it's not just about the Senedd, and it's not just about those people at leadership level. You're absolutely right. You have to have a plan. You have to have a vision. You have to know where you want to go, and you have to want to get there. You know, you do need to want to get there. You know, if you're happy with the way things are, then, you know, I don't know who is happy with the way things are in Wales. There probably are a few people. You know, I would suggest that within parts of some of the political parties, things suit them quite well. And even within some other organizations, you know, there's plenty of people where things suit them. But if you're listening to this, if someone is listening to this and they have ambition for Wales, if they found themselves nodding along, agreeing with a lot of what you and I have been saying, then those individuals can make a huge difference, because they can change their language in their lives. They can change their approach in their lives. And it doesn't matter what part of an organization they are, where they work, they can change their approach to their work. It can be as simple as going into work every day with an attitude of, what can I problem solve today? What can I make better? There's a friction there in my work. It's not as smooth as it could be. Let's address that friction and find a better way of doing it. And it can be a tiny thing, okay? It can be a tiny thing. One of my favorite examples of this comes from the hospitality sector, where there was an enormous kitchen, occasionally serving 100 covers at a time in a hotel. And they had those little oil bottles that you put on the table. And one of the kitchen porters, his job at the beginning of every day was to refill these oil and put them out there. But obviously the big, massive oil container, I don't know if you've seen them, they've got that sort of pull-out spout things, metal containers. And this was a saga, because trying to pour from that spigot into these tiny little olive was just a messy job, and oil would go everywhere. So they developed this solution, which they'd been using and passing on from kitchen porter to kitchen porter. They'd put it in a bowl, they'd pour it so that the oil wasn't wasted in the bowl, then they'd wipe them all down, stop with them, and put them on the table. And a new member of staff started in this restaurant hotel, was part of the waiting staff, and she walked into the kitchen and she watched this, and she watched it for a few minutes, and she said, "What are you doing?" And they explained that this was the process and how they'd been shown to do it. So she walked past them, she went to get a jug, she walked back, she filled the jug from the awkward olive oil container, and she used this jug to slowly fill one of these olive oil things for the table without spilling a drop. She put them down and she said, "Do it that way." And she walked out. That saved them an hour a day. Now, it's so absurd. You just think to yourself, how can they be so stupid? How can they have been so stupid to do that for 9, 10, 11, 12 months? Because that's the way they've been shown how to do it. But that's the way we did it. And Wales is full of that's the way we do it. That's the way it's always been done. And it is not full of people going into work and stepping back and taking 5 minutes and thinking and looking and going, wait a minute, there's a lot of friction in that process. How can we do that better? But everyone who's listening to this can do that, and they should.
I was going to comment halfway through there, but didn't want to ruin the story. I know that you're very good at making sure there's friction in everything that you undertake. There's always questions, and can we do this better coming from you within New Wales, which is great. One of the things that I also like to talk to you about is the rejection that is felt by a lot of the diaspora. So there are people out here in the world that do want to do something for Wales. They'd quite like to reinvest into Wales. They'd quite like to give their skills to people in Wales. But they feel there is either not the infrastructure to allow them to do that, or more poignant is that they're not wanted. They're not desired to be there. There isn't a reason to go, because, as you were just alluding to, their different way of thinking, their way that they've learned and been successful with in perhaps the Middle East or America, isn't wanted in Wales. And I think that's very sad. I think it's, sort of kicking ourselves or shooting ourselves in the foot. But I guess I'm going with this is how do we change that? Because I've started engaging for this podcast with a lot of diaspora individuals, and they do have that intent, and they do have desire, but none of them want to return to Wales because it doesn't meet any of those needs.
Yeah,
and we're going to need those people to come back.
So I want them to come back. I want them to invest their money. I want them to share their ideas. I want them to do all of those things. If they're listening and they want to do that, come and talk to me. Come and talk to us in New Wales. Let's just do it. Why do we need someone else to build that infrastructure for us? Why do we need? They're doing, if they're going, oh, they don't want us in Wales, they're doing what Welsh government do about Westminster. Oh, Westminster won't give us what we asked for, so we'll just give up. Well, you can give up, or you can get up and you can do something about it. And I at the moment, I've only got a part-time job. I've got time on my hands. I will help people with things like this. Even if I had a full-time job, I would make the time to help with things like this. And all of a sudden, you start to build a network, and you have people who are willing to do things. You have people contributing resources, and that becomes transformative. And there are some members of the diaspora who have done this. They have come back, and they have done this, and they have invested. Not enough for it to be a tipping point, not enough for it to contribute towards a wider cultural change. And certainly there isn't enough talking about it or shouting about it. When we are not good in Wales about sharing information, about bigging ourselves up, about enforcing that confidence, about talking about it, about saying how amazing we are.
I think that's something that also the diaspora say to me a lot is that Wales needs to be more like the Irish in understanding what it wants from us as diaspora, what we're gonna get from it, and create, and how we collectively create the global image and the global story for Wales. And there's a sense of, I think, what you say is very true, but a lot of these people have already had success in their lives. They're not looking for new challenges. They're not looking to do extra work. They have a passion and a love for where they're from, and they'd like to put money and their knowledge into that, but they don't want to go around starting new companies or spending hours every week trying to restructure Wales. They want things to be there and easy for them. Is that a fault of theirs? I don't think so. It's human nature, no?
No, I don't think so. And I mean, those people are in Wales. Wales is constantly producing people who have talent, skills, and ability, but often don't have resources. I mean, in terms of the reward, there's multiple rewards, aren't there? There's financial reward. If a place is like Wales, the lower you are, the further you have to climb. So that counts for everything. So, the potential in Wales is vast. And Wales certainly has an absolute plethora of unique selling points in terms of its global capacity to be an unique asset in so many ways. We don't sell ourselves to the world much. We don't have that sort of dominant Welsh persona in a global context in the way that Scotland might or Ireland does, because we don't sell ourselves and we haven't sold ourselves. People like my mother are notable in their unusual intent and nature because she deliberately set out to sell Wales to the world in ways that others did not. And everything about Wales, the Welsh language, the Welsh culture, she was doing that a long, long, long time before it was even recognised by more official bodies in Wales that, oh, actually, maybe we can talk about Welsh myths, legends. Maybe we can make something of the fact that we have our own language and a different culture and things like the Eisteddfod. You know, she was doing it 30 years before. But when you're doing that on your own in Tregaron, it doesn't have weight, which is a shame. But if you're doing it as a nation of 3 million collectively, with support from the 1.5 million odd diaspora around the world, you know, that is transformative. And again, it boils down to very little more than changing language and changing intent and making it about what you can do and how good you can be.
And so I suppose we can dive into, if you're willing to, the Senate elections of next year.
Okay.
Because I think both you and I have written for Nation and other publications on this subject, and it, you know, what's running through this conversation is the theme of self-belief and being brave and courageous and ambitious for yourself and for Wales as a nation. The latest polling for the Senate election next year is putting it pretty much neck and neck between Plaid Cymru and Reform UK. And I think you probably know where I'm going with this. If Wales really gives that much backing to Reform, they're just perpetuating this overlordship from England and basically saying, well, it's always rubbish, it's rubbish. I'm just going to aid these people that are going to destroy things more for us, as I see it.
Well, people are angry, aren't they, Simon? I think that's the thing. People are angry that so much at a UK-wide level and here in Wales, so much has been done poorly or badly. Bad decisions, short-term decisions have been made which have impacted people. There's been a dearth of adequate long-term planning in so many ways. There's definitely been an overabundance of selling things off and outsourcing and allowing the rent profit farmers, the large, often global rent profit farmers, to come in and you know, extract. And Wales has got a history of,
yeah. And if we go back to our earlier conversation about the water companies, obviously, I mean, the coincidence of Macquarie Group owned Thames Water, and you know, they extracted billions of pounds out of that for their shareholders, which are often foreign governments. And you know, yes, that's happened, but the point and where I'm coming from, I accept that people are angry, accept that people are frustrated and frightened about their futures, but you don't correct that in a positive way by actually emboldening and supporting a group or group of peoples or a person that supports and will advance all of those things you've just mentioned.
yeah, Simon, I'm not going to argue that it's a particularly mature response, but it is an understandable response. It's like the frustrated teenager, you know, punching the wall, isn't it? You know, people are frustrated and people are angry. And because of that, they want to protest. And at the moment, the most visible protest vote is for Reform UK. Now, they're not the only protest vote. There are other parties in Wales that people could choose as a protest vote. You know, the Greens in particular, I would say, would make for a protest vote in Wales. And I suspect that they will have more prominence and will probably do better than people expect come May, not least because of the wind in their sails from the additional coverage that their new leader, Zach Polanski, is getting. And I actually saw him in an event here in Cardiff I think last week or the week before, and of the speakers on the stage, he was the best performer, and he is an unabashed eco-populist and willing to use the same tactics, possibly without the misinformation and disinformation, as the right-wing populists. This will get him airtime, and airtime means that, you know, he'll be on people's radars. The question really is around reform. There's no doubt that they will get support in the way that UKIP got support in the past here in Wales. The question is more around the level of support and how long it takes them to implode. It's becoming increasingly obvious and evident that it is a party for failed Tories or for disillusioned Tories. You know, I think yet another former Tory MP joined Reform yesterday or the day before. I think the former MP for Wrexham, former Armed Forces Minister. You know, the list of ex-Tories who are in Reform is huge. The list of ex-Tory staffers who have become Reform staffers. I think Andrew R.T. Davis's SPAD has just become the spokesperson for Reform in Wales, for example. So, you know, former SPAD to the former leader of the Conservatives in Wales is now the spokesperson for Reform UK in Wales. This is clearly an indication of where this party is going and where this party lies. And, you know, potentially the only logical outcome for the Tories and Reform at some stage is to reconstitute as a new party. Obviously, collectively as a party, particularly for their first past the post ambitions across the border. Now, I don't know, and I don't want to speculate particularly about that, because I have no confidence or faith in Reform. I am hoping that they are not too destructive, however much support they have in Wales and however much of a presence they have in the Senedd. I hope that there is enough of a residual, sensible, surrounding presence in there to limit the amount of damage that they can do, because they are disruptors and they are destructors, and that is their intent in a Welsh context. We may as well accept that and say it plainly and openly. More concerning for me is how shapeless the other parties are. So the Labour Party is in complete chaos, as far as I can tell, within Wales and possibly even across the border. It's got no shape or structure. It clearly doesn't have a long-term vision for the future of Wales. You know, it just doesn't have it. And the smaller parties are smaller parties. You don't necessarily expect them to. Plaid Cymru deserve to be at the top there because they've made some effort. They're in Wales at the moment. They're the only party showing any semblance of competence. On that basis alone, they deserve to come out on top. And I'm not saying that they're showing a huge amount of competence, but they're showing the basic semblance of competence that we should expect from all of our serious political parties. You know, we should be expecting this from all of them. We should be expecting them to clearly express their vision for our nation, to share it with us in understandable ways, and to demonstrate that they can competently deliver that. So for those reasons, I am hopeful that Plaid come out on top, although because people don't quite realize that you can tactically vote in this election, even though it's proportional representation. I won't go into that because it will take up a lot of time. The maths is amazing though, and fascinating, and a little bit crazy, because it's designed for larger constituencies with more voters, and or in a Welsh context, it would work with fewer parties. It'll be even more interesting if the sort of nascent Your Party gets its act together quickly enough and actually fields candidates, because then the maths gets even crazier, which is something for all the nerds and cephalogists out there to look forward to if that happens. In a clinical fashion, obviously. So, you know, it looks as though we're going to get a change of government. It looks as though the largest party will be Plaid Cymru, if they can maintain their momentum, keep the clarity of message. If they're willing to be bold and brave, I really hope they don't go for a Ming Vars approach and do this, you know, don't upset anybody because you're in the lead in the polls. I think they should double down and say, look, guys, we give a shit about Wales. Right now, no one else does. Or if they do, they're not in any shape to do anything about it because they're in complete chaos. So it's a simple message, and hopefully that will persuade people to give them a shot in the way that the SNP got their shot roughly 10 years ago in Scotland. And then we can hope that there's a change of language at the top, a change of approach, more openness, more transparency, all those things that Andrew Davies was talking about in his subtle quote. You know, all of those things happen, and that we then slowly start to see the change in culture impacting the lives of people in Wales in positive ways over the next 4 years and potentially beyond. Because once you start that process of change, once you get to those tipping points, it develops its own momentum. There's an appreciation of innovation. You know, there's a different attitude when you go into work in the morning. There's more positivity in the world around you. And I don't want to sound like an internet influencer, the power of positive thinking, man. But you know, it's true. If you're confident and you're upbeat and you're positive, things will go better.
And so, bringing the conversation to a close, as I ask of everybody that comes on Blueprint Cymru, and any listener that's interested in subjects such as reforming the economy in Wales, or looking at how we can improve democracy, and I talk a lot with different guests about digital democracy, they should check out other episodes. But where Gwern, do you think and hope Wales will be in 15 or 20 years' time from now?
Oh, that's a great question, isn't it? Where do I hope Wales will be in 15 or 20 years from now? 15 or 20 years is a long time. And I hope that Wales will be more united culturally than it is now. I hope it will be much more confident in its presentation of itself to the wider world. I hope it will have stood up quite clearly and with sufficient clarity and insisted that whatever constitutional settlement we have is one that works and works well. And, you know, I think it's more important that that constitutional settlement works and works well than, you know, this deciding whether it's sovereignty or, you know, whatever you want to call it. It's that it works. And for that to work, I'm a big believer in local democracy. That does mean, you know, bringing more power closer to the people. And in that context, I think that one thing I would definitely love to see is some root, and this is possible now, by the way, even though they've tried a couple of times and failed, but a root and branch restructuring of local government in Wales, which doesn't work. You know, we do not need 22 local authorities in Wales. We do not need 22 education authorities in Wales. We are a population of 3.14 million people. You know, these things we've over-engineered our local government structures, and they don't function in the ways that they should, or effectively or efficiently as they should or could. So those things I would like to see. I would love to see the process of change in terms of transport infrastructure that's been begun with the metro system here in Cardiff broadened out and spread across Wales, so that we have, you know, decent infrastructure. It was interesting, I mentioned Zach Balansky earlier. He did a tour of Wales with Anthony Slaughter, apparently. He mentioned it in his speech, and he could not understand why he had to leave Wales to go to North Wales. So he drove out of Wales, out of South Wales, through England to go to, he could not understand. And obviously Anthony had to explain that to him. First timer coming to Wales. You know, it's obvious to people from outside. You know, these things are things that should and could have been addressed a long time ago, but haven't been. So all of those things, and 100 more, you know, but all of those things all boil back down to us taking control of our own destiny confidently and with clear ambition for the change that we want to see. That's that favour says, isn't it? Be the change you want to see. Well, That's for us to do, for you and I, for all the listeners here, whether they're diaspora, whether they're living in Wales. It is for all of us to genuinely step up and do our small bits to make that happen. And I'm confident. I'm not always confident. Sometimes, sometimes you get beaten down, but I picked myself up because I do have passion for Wales and I do have ambition for Wales. And I have children who I want to have opportunities in Wales. And I know other children in Wales who I want to have that opportunity. And I want the children in Wales who are currently suffering in relative poverty to not be suffering in relative poverty, so that they have more opportunities and more chances to succeed in an environment which breeds success. So that is what I want to see. It's that change, that fundamental change in attitude about who we are. That's the thing I want to see.
Gwern Gwynfil, diolch yn fawr. Thank you for being a guest.
Simon, mae wedi bod yn bleser bob amser.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more conversations with people who want to build the future of Wales. And do go and find, like and enjoy new.wales across all your favourite social media channels.